Hey, what's going on, Damascus? This is Lance here, and just another video to add to our Battle of the Mind talk. So let's jump right in. So we are Damascus. This is Way of the Warrior. This is a 9-discipline study that we've been going on for quite a while now. We did truth last couple weeks. Before that was prayer, quiet time, Bible study. We're moving into determination, which is the second part of Battle of the Mind this week. So we'll jump in it today. So welcome to the 9 disciplines. Real quick, here's our mission statement. Kingdom warriors, encouraging men daily to become fully armored disciples of Jesus. The 9 disciplines are really that whole focus on the become now. So what are the 9 disciplines? The 9 disciplines are just a system for connecting to Jesus daily. That's all that is. We know that we're going to have good habits. We're going to have bad habits. So what we want to do is we want to have the kind of habits that keep us connected to Jesus. They connect us to him every day and keep us connected. And that's built on John 15:5, which says, I'm the vine, you're the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So we want to do that. And 9 disciplines in itself is just that strict season of training. All these habits are consecutive, meaning you can't skip prayer and quiet time and can't skip Bible study and hope to be effective at the disciplines to win the battle of the mind. So we're going to go in this strict season of training. And we know that successful people do consistently what others do occasionally. So we're going to review where we're at, Battle of the Mind. Tonight, truth. This is kind of the final thought. We're closing out truth as just before we go into determination. We may or may not have videos on determination. It just depends what the demand is for our group. But for right now, we're going to go into that. We know this, the battle of the mind, the battle is won and lost in the theater of your mind, in your headspace. Very, very important. So what do we know from our last couple weeks together? Excuse me, my mouth's really dry. So what do we know? A couple bullet points. We know we're in a war. We know we are born into this world separated from God and enemies with God. I know that for those who receive salvation that comes from Christ, they are no longer enemies with God. And by this, we now stand on the side with Jesus and are now in the angel army of the King, in the army of light. And I know that I am a warrior of light. And we can see that in Colossians 1:21, where it says, once you were alienated from God, were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior, but now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. So a couple things. Also, too, in the battle of the mind, some of the things that we've looked at, for one, is that, like I said, these habits, these disciplines are consecutive. They're built one on top of the other. Winning the battle of the mind cannot be done without first establishing some foundational habits or disciplines. And for us, in the 9 disciplines, quiet time and prayer is discipline number 1. Meeting with Jesus every day in prayer, one-on-one, in a quiet place is important. And with that, Bible study, that we're taking his word, renewing our mind with it. We're spending time in it. Okay. And what do these foundational disciplines do? They expose us to Jesus as his word, and then they teach us to recognize truth. Okay. Truth is the first of 2 tactical disciplines we practice so we can win the fight in our mind, in our headspace. So let's look at something Paul said here in Ephesians 6. He says, therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything to stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist. And then he goes on to talk about the other parts of your armor and your shield and your sword. But the first thing he tells us to do is put on our armor every day as we get ready. Truth is really important. In the world, the economy is divided into 2 halves: truth and things that are not true. And we want to always dwell and operate in the things that are true. And it starts with Jesus. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today and how that all fits together. So moving into our questions here about truth. Why is truth important? Well, here's some ideas we're going to throw around today. Some of this stuff we've already talked about. Some of the stuff we're going to talk about tonight. So we know this: without truth, okay, why is it important? Without truth, we're blind, stuck in the darkness, prisoners of what's not true. So here's a couple bullet points. What's our counter to that so that we're not blind, stuck in the darkness? We will need to be prepared, well armed and fully equipped with God's truth. Okay, what does that mean? That's back to those foundational habits: time with Jesus, time in his word. Keeping your eyes on Jesus and his purpose for me, not on what my flesh wants. I mean, our eyes are fixated on him. We're always looking towards him. The minute you drift away from him and into the things of this world, you're getting set up for what's not true. And that's what we saw in Genesis 3 with Eve, where she was looking at the fruit she wasn't supposed to eat, and the enemy used that as an opportunity. Next bullet point: keep us out of darkness. Get good at exposing the lie and replacing with the truth. What is that? That's where you take those thoughts captive, you make them obedient to Christ. Something comes in, something is presented to you, and you have to think, is this true? And you have to examine it, and then you have to expose what's not true about it. And the best way to do that is to go into God's word to help you expose that. Learn quickly to choose not to dwell in the cycle of destruction. Okay, so this is another thing that keeps us where we got to be able to recognize where we messed up, where our sin has led us. And if we stay in that area where we're dealing with and living in and out of lies and not in truth, we're going to end up in some dangerous places that kind of meat grinder us up in some bad choices. So we have to be really careful. If you're not familiar with the cycle of destruction, we do have another video here on our YouTube page. Goes into detail about that. What's something else that we need to know about truth? It helps us to see through the fog of war and to be sober-minded in our headspace. One of the things is that the world is constantly throwing all kinds of things at us that present themselves as true, but aren't true. And we have to be able to see through that fog of war, that dimness of what's not true, and really dig through there until we find out what is true. Another place too is we really have to learn to manage our headspace. Every man is usually in one of three places in his headspace. He's either really captured by the past, the things that happened yesterday. We talked about that also in another YouTube video. I think the one before this called Headspace, where you can talk about that. Or so guys are talking in the past, guys are stuck in the future, but they rarely live in the now. So we have to learn to manage our minds, not let ourselves drift away or into places we shouldn't go in our thinking. Some other places is the more time another truth, why truth is important. The more time you spend with truth, it's easier to spot what is not true. And that goes back to that fog of war. Truth starts with the right idea of God. We're going to talk about that tonight. Truth lives in those who know God and hear his voice. We're going to talk about that tonight. And we're also, these last 3 points, we're going to talk about these as well. Truth is a person. Truth is a belt. And we've alluded to that a little bit in Ephesians 6. We're going to talk about that a little bit further. And we're going to talk about being men of integrity. So let's get in and kind of talk about some of these bullet points. So these, I just shouted these out to you on the last slide. Truth starts with the right idea of God. We're going to talk about to know God and to hear his voice. Truth is a person. Truth is a belt. And be men of integrity. So let's jump in to what is truth. And this is in our part of our conversation tonight is really going to come from this conversation that Jesus had with Pilate to help us understand truth a little bit better, where it starts, where we should begin in this journey of understanding what is true and what is not true. So let's go through this conversation. And so in John 18:33-38, Jesus is with Pilate. He's just before his crucifixion. Pilate's kind of the guy in charge of Jesus's life right here at this moment, or anyway, he's the one that's supposed to execute him. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, so they're in this conversation, Pilate wants to know, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus answered, do you say this on your own accord, or did others say it to you about me? Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have I done? What have you done? What have you done? Okay. And so he's trying to just dig into this, why he's executing this guy, why he's going to beat this guy. And so Jesus answered him. He goes, look, my kingdom's not of this world. If it were of this world, my servants would not have, they would be fighting and they would not have delivered me to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world. This is important. We're going to break this down here in a minute. Then Pilate said to him, so you're king? Jesus answered, second statement. So you say that I'm king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who's on the side of truth listens and hears my voice. Pilate said to him then this really profound question. He goes, what is truth? So we're going to see, what did Jesus reveal in this conversation to help us understand truth a little bit better? So we're going to break it down. So let's look at Jesus' first statement here. So Jesus said this, let's just reiterate, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I may not be delivered over the Jews, but my kingdom is not from this world. Truth starts with a right idea of God and his kingdom. So let's look at this first spiritual truth. There is a spiritual kingdom. Okay, and we can see this in two scriptures right here, Matthew 4:17. And Jesus says, from the time Jesus began to preach, Jesus would say this. He would say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. There is a spiritual kingdom. It was being introduced by Jesus. Up to this point, there was only one kingdom that people were aware of, and that was the kingdom of the world, its principalities, and its darkness, its fallenness, where death ruled. Jesus was bringing a new kingdom, or access to a new kingdom through himself. Okay, Romans 14:17 says this, for the kingdom of God is not a matter of eating and drinking, but of righteousness, of peace and joy and the Holy Spirit. So there is a spiritual kingdom. Truth number one. Truth is a kingdom, has a spiritual kingdom. So truth number two goes with that. If there's a kingdom, well, who's in charge? Every kingdom has a king, has a Lord, okay? And so we're going to use this scripture here to just highlight how God sees himself, how Jesus perceives himself in his authority in this kingdom. And here's just a brief little example in this conversation. So a long time ago, a man named Cyrus, a Persian king, conquered Babylon. And in this, he was handed a scroll written several hundred years before he was even born to him from God about who God is and who he is and what he's about to do. And so Jesus wanted to, the Lord God wanted to explain his authority here in this situation. So I'm going to read a little bit of this verse. Isaiah 45:1 says this, thus say the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue the nations before him and to loose the belts of kings, to open doors before him that gates may not be closed. I will go before you and level the exalted places. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze and cut through bars of iron. I will give you treasures of darkness and your name. For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel, my chosen, I call you by your name. I name you. Though you do not know me, I am the Lord and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. I equip you, though you do not know me, that people may know from the rising of the sun from the west that there is none besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. And you can see as he goes through there, continue to exclamate his point about who he is. Now, he's talking here to a man who isn't who is basically a Gentile king. He is not a Jewish king. He's not, he's just separated from God in darkness. And Jesus still explains to him he's part of his purpose and that he is Lord. So we know this. Spiritual truth one, when we're talking about the right idea of God, that there is a spiritual kingdom. Spiritual truth number two, Jesus is Lord of that kingdom. Okay, so as we move forward into this next slide, we're going to look at a couple more things about how God is perceived. Okay, so there's a spiritual truth, there's a spiritual king. So let's look at some more things about God that are significant. Because remember, our question here, our thought here is that to know truth, we first have to have the right idea of God. So theologians throughout history have basically described God in three ways. This is kind of our tiny human brain way to kind of to label how we could possibly conceive of God and how his character is made up. And there's kind of three components to it, really four, but we'll talk about these. So the first is this: God is omnipotent. That means all potent or all powerful. God is all powerful. He has the ability to act, possess or control authority and influence. And if God is all powerful, how much power does that leave for everything else that isn't God? Does that make sense? He has all authority, all power. Okay, that's the first part of understanding God, the right idea of God. He's all powerful. There's nothing he can't do. The next is omniscience, omniscience. I can never say it. I'm just going to say omniscience. Omniscience. This is all knowledge. This is all knowing. We are constantly learning. We're constantly growing. We're constantly changing our ability to know elements in science. But God is immutable, which means he never changes. He knows everything. There's nothing for him to learn. It's not like he's ever waiting on more information. He knows it all. And the third is omnipresence. This is all presence. God is in all places at all time. He's not confined like us by a calendar and dates and a clock with linear time, meaning there's this minute, there's next minute, there's last minute. There's tomorrow, there's yesterday, and there's next year. For us, God's not confined by that. And he says in the Bible, he says, I'm the beginning and the end. I'm the Alpha and the Omega. And to grab hold of that, a good picture would be if you're ever stuck in your car at some train tracks and there's a train going by, you'll notice that you can see the front of the train and the back of the train maybe all at once. Okay? So you see the beginning of the train, you see the end of the train. So that's where you stand. Okay? Now, if the train was a timeline, you're outside of it seeing the beginning from the end. This is omnipresence. This is God. Okay? We're in the train car. We only see what's around us in the car that we're in. We don't see the locomotive way ahead, and we don't see the caboose in the back. We just see where we're at. So this is an idea of omnipresence. Another is the aseity of God. God is self-existent, meaning that there was nothing before God. And this is probably the hardest thing to wrap your mind around. And Exodus 3:14 kind of alludes to helping us understand that. When God said to Moses, I am who I am, and he said, say this to the people, I am. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it doesn't happen in our culture, but in that culture, you're always associated by your father. And if we were operating the same today as we did back then, I would be Lance Ben Art, or Lance, son of Art. Art is my dad. I'm his son, and everybody would know me. Oh, that's Lance. He's the son of Art, and that's how you'll be known. And so in that culture, it's the same thing. And then here God is saying, I am, meaning that there's no one before him. He is the first and the last. And so a aseity of God is also important. So what we're doing is we're building towards understanding how we operate in truth. Okay, truth is a huge part of us winning the battle in the mind. It's a discipline that we operate in, that we train in, and it starts with getting a right idea of God. We know that truth has a spiritual kingdom, that truth has a king in that spiritual kingdom, that God is omnipresent. He's all over the place. He's never confined by time, that he's all knowing, that nothing came before him. God is not limited by anything. He's all powerful. Okay, so we know that truth starts with the right idea of God and his kingdom, and Jesus is Lord. So this is our landing point for the first part of understanding truth. Okay, so as we go on, we're going to dig a little deeper, and let's look at Jesus' second statement to Pontius Pilate here. And he says this: everyone who is on the side of truth listens to my voice. So truth also, in addition to everything we've just talked about, truth also lives in those who know God and hear his voice. Okay, so let's explore this a little bit. Truth number one, let's break this in two segments here. Everyone who is on the side of truth. So let's break this apart. This is to know God. You either know God or you don't know God. That's it. It comes down. In the end days, at the judgment, you'll either know Jesus or you will not. Okay? So truth dwells in those who know him. So if truth were money, it would prominently display Jesus. You can see there's a little picture of Jesus money there, saying, I am the truth, the life, and the way. This is the currency of the kingdom. We operate in this currency, the currency of truth. Now, there's another side to this, a side apart from truth, and that is a foreign currency. And those coins are marked with the face of evil, and the enemy is marked with the words kill, steal, and destroy. And in Romans, we kind of get a glimpse of this. So listen close. This is Paul writes this, Romans 1:18-25. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress truth. For what can be known about God, and we're talking about the right idea of God, is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power, divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world. This is what we're talking about. All knowing, all present, all powerful. Okay? In these things that have been made so that they are without excuse. Okay? So although they knew God, they did not honor him as God, nor give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, exchanging the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, animals, and creepy things. Therefore, God gave them up to their lusts in their hearts, to impurities of dishonoring their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshiped and served the created rather than the Creator, who blessed them. So, again, we can see that there is a side to truth. You're either with truth or you're not. And the world, in the fog of war, this kind of cloudiness out in the world, has laid out this idea and it's kind of labeled as relativism, that there is no one truth, that each truth belongs to each individual, and they can decide for themselves. There is no absolute truth, and this is false. Okay, this is a false currency. That's that's a currency of the enemy. Okay, so where do we stand? Well, let's look at John 8:44. You are of the Father. He's talking to the Pharisees right now. He goes, so he's having an argument with the Pharisees. So he says, you are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character. He is a liar and the father of lies. So where do we stand? Well, we stand in truth. We have to stand on the side of truth with Jesus. Okay. What's truth number two? Those on the side of truth, okay, we established that, also listen to his voice or hear his voice. Okay. And we can see in two scriptures here, John 10:1-5, the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out of his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. So they hear his voice and they recognize his voice. In John 16:13, when the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all truth. What's the Spirit that's of truth? That's the Holy Spirit. That's what we're given when at salvation. When you believe in Jesus in your heart and you confess with your mouth that he is the Lord God, that he died on the cross for my sins, he rose on the third day. When you believe that in your heart and you confess it with your mouth, God's promise to you in that is to give you the Holy Spirit. Okay. And he seals you with it for the day of redemption, but also too, this is so that you are now connected forever to God and with God, and you can hear his voice and he can speak to your heart. Okay. And he will guide you into all truth, for he will not speak on his own authority, but whatever he hears, he will speak, and he will declare to you the things that are to come. So that's the second truth that we can see there. So where do we land on this? Where we land on this is that Jesus speaks. One, Jesus, there's truth in those who know God, and there's truth in those who hear and listen to God and know his voice. So Jesus the King speaks if we want to listen. Truth lives in those who know God and hear his voice. We belong to God. We hear his voice if we want to hear his voice. So why do I say that? If we want to hear his voice. Well, here's the problem. For years now, I've been doing ministry, and I will hear guys say, I don't hear God's voice. And they know they're Christians. They believe in Jesus, so they should hear his voice, but they say that they don't. And my thought is that maybe they don't really want to hear it. Sometimes we don't want to hear God's voice because we don't want to hear what he's going to say. We don't think that we can handle it. Or there's a lie in there about what he might say. Okay, so there's a lot of things going on. But the truth is that in truth, we know God. And when we operate in truth, we also hear his voice. So if you can't hear his voice, you're not getting instructions from the Holy Spirit, then we've got to figure out what that is. Is there a lie in the way, or is there shame in the way? Either way, that has to be dealt with. For us to operate clearly in our headspace, we have to operate in truth, and part of that is hearing his voice. All right, so a couple things to add to this about truth. Truth, you have to have the right idea of God. There is a kingdom. Jesus is Lord of that kingdom, right? We also know that you need to know God and hear his voice. And then here's a couple other things. Truth is not just the opposite of a lie. It's not just a thing. Truth is actually a person. Jesus is truth. His presence is truth. He brings light into the world. As light comes in the world, truth comes into the world. Darkness is the color of a lie, and light is the color of truth. Okay? So Jesus is the person of truth, and he has power. And we can read this. Let's look at a couple scriptures here. John 14:6. Jesus said to them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. It's part of who he is. It is who he is. No one comes to the Father except through me. John 8:32. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Well, I'm not set free because of an idea. I'm not set free because of specific words that I speak. I'm set free because of what Jesus did for me at the cross. The person of Jesus at the cross, what he did, that act, and my belief in that act and who he was, that's what set me free. So truth is a person. Again, John 4:22-24. But the hour is coming, is now here, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, and the Father is seeking such people to worship him, God in spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. Truth is a person. So let's look at the next one. Truth is the belt that holds the sword. And I love this picture that we have here. This comes from Ephesians 6. We talked about it a little bit before. Here it is in a little more detail. But truth is the belt around our waist that holds the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. So what I like to think of is that we put on truth first. So I'm picturing like a soldier getting dressed in the morning, and the first thing he does is he puts on, over his tunic, he puts his belt of truth on. That's like the first piece. And immediately there's that empty scabbard there, right? So you have the belt of truth, and it's incomplete though without the sword to go in it. And the sword for us, as you can see here, down there in verse 17, it says, "Take up the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God." So we with the word of God, that's part of putting on the belt of truth. So we're clothing ourselves with Jesus every day, because truth is a person. So I'm clothing myself with him. When I'm putting that truth around me, I'm declaring his truth, who he is, what he's done, who I am in him. I'm putting that on, and I'm taking the truth that comes with the word of God, the sword of the Spirit, right? That the word that goes out and does not return void. I'm taking that with me. I'm arming myself up with that. Okay, truth holds all things together, and God's word is our written truth. Okay, so the Bible is that written truth. It's that offensive weapon. It's a sword of the Spirit. It goes hand in hand with the Holy Spirit in you. Colossians 1:15 says, the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones and powers and rulers of authority. All things have been made, created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Truth. I don't know if you know much about biology, but there is a cell, a structure in the body that holds everything together. It's called laminin, meaning that if you everything that holds all your organs together, your skin together, your brain together, it's it's kind of thinking as the girder system in a building. It's kind of the same thing. It's holding everything in your body together. It's called laminin. And if you look at laminin under a microscope, it looks like a tiny cross, like a tiny little cross. I mean, your body is literally held together with billions of little tiny crosses. So I love this scripture that Jesus holds all things together. Another is 2 Corinthians 10:4. This is that offensive weapon again. The weapon we fight with are not weapons of this world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. So the truth that we have in us, the power of Jesus in us and the word of God in us, is not just words on a page. It's not just things you speak. They actually have power to divine and to go places that normal worldly weapons could not go. All right. And then lastly, let's talk about this. This is kind of where we close on truth for us. So this is our final thought on truth, where we're just kind of closing this out before we go into determination. So where do we land? What's our takeaway? Well, we must be men of integrity and walk in truth always. We have to. So what is integrity? Well, the best definition I ever heard for integrity is that integrity is what you do when nobody is looking. Okay, what you do when nobody's looking. And so we with truth, if truth is the currency of the kingdom of Jesus, we must choose not to use that foreign currency, which is the lie. So a man of integrity doesn't lie. He doesn't lie to others, and he doesn't lie to God, and he doesn't lie to himself. And this is huge. We have to make sure that we're walking in integrity. And here's some scriptures. Ephesians 5:1 says, "Take no part in unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them." Remember, the color of a lie, the color of the lies of the enemy, that's darkness. The color of the truth is light. Okay, John 8:12. Again, Jesus spoke to them saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness." They don't operate in that foreign currency. Okay, John 3:19-21. "And this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light, because their works are evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God." Okay, so that's where we close tonight. So we're going to look at some real quick. If you guys are following along, there's some questions to kind of ponder this week. As you look at this video and you guys think about truth, here's some questions. What is the spiritual kingdom? What is your right idea of God? I love that if you guys like to read like I do sometimes, there's a guy named A.W. Tozer, a very smart guy, lived a long time ago. He's got a book called The Knowledge of the Holy. And in chapter 1 is real powerful. And he asks the question, why must we think rightly about God? And where he lands on that before he starts this entire book was what comes into our minds, okay, about God is the most important thing about us. What comes into your mind about God is the most important thing about you. And so understanding what a spiritual kingdom is, spending time talking about that, thinking about that, and then asking also too, how do you stay focused on something that you can't see with your physical eyes? So you need to dwell on that. Number 2, there's a difference between Jesus as your Savior and Jesus as your Lord. And I would ask that you meditate and explore that. What is the difference? What is Jesus your Savior? Well, is he your Lord, or is he both? What's the difference? So explore that a little bit. And then lastly, do you hear from the Lord? Do you hear from the Lord? And if you do, great. If not, why not? Do you really want to hear from the Lord? And if you are hearing from the Lord, what's he saying to you right now in this season to your life? And then lastly, of course, after you watch this video or talk with your small group, what were your biggest takeaways tonight? You always, no matter what happens, there should be at least one parting gift. There may be something that you can take away and meditate on. Short of that, guys, thank you so much. This is our final thought on truth. We're going to close out here, and then we may have some videos on determination that are yet to be seen. But other than that, man, love you guys. See you later. Have a great one.